Hey, it's pumpkin season, and that means weird people putting things in pumpkins that probably don't belong. So I decided, why not make my own little creatures to stuff inside the squishy cold out corpse of a rotting vegetable. Then I realized, ew, that's gross. I'll just use fake ones instead. So here we are. For this sculpt, I decided to be extremely boring and make one of the more generally accepted creatures of autumn, which are a fox and crow. For this sculpt, we're starting with the bird, because I like birds. Get some tin foil, scrunch it into a shape, and there, you have wings and a weird head, which I stuffed into the pumpkin just to make sure it fits. Then I got rid of that little handle thing, covered the tinfoil in clay, then used more tinfoil to make a scarf which wraps around the bottom of the clay head to make less awkward transition between the pumpkin and the eventual clay creature, which also gets covered in clay. Next I used the ball stylus to add 2 small gaping holes into the clay, roll little balls to act as eyes, and stuff those along with a triangular beak onto the crow's face. Now add texture. I just scraped a toothpick along the edge of the clay for, I don't know, about a long, tedious hour, and ta-da, it's finished. I also made little feet off screen, but spoiler alert, neither the feet nor the wings end up being used in the final product because I just didn't like them. So now they reside somewhere in a box of totally awesome junk I will definitely use to make something cool in the future. Now on to the fox. I made a tinfoil head, stuffed it into its new home as a test fit, and made a tail that will get glued on later and covered in clay. I also decided to add some tiny tinfoil ears because my clay is soft and it gets squished easily. Next I added eyes. Then realized, oh right, foxes don't have flat faces, so I extended his skeletal structure outwards just a bit, covered it in clay and added a tiny nose. Okay, it's texture time. Great, another hour has passed and everything looks slightly more interesting than it did before. Oh, also, those tiny feet never get used either. Anyways, I made little pumpkin hats. Here they are being test fitted, covered in clay, and where the roots of the pumpkin meet the clay, I drew lines with a toothpick, create the illusion that this could actually be the top of a pumpkin. But then there were too many lines, so I got rid of a few. Next I used a toothpick to blend the edges of the clay into one another and create actual grooves into the pumpkin top. Added a stem, then used my ball stylus to add texture, because I'm bad at smoothing out clay, but I'd argue most things have texture anyways, isn't that more realistic? Also, maybe it's kinda obvious, but that fox face looks more like a chubby dog, and I could argue that it's a style choice, but I don't know, I'm sorry. Alright, it's baking time. Look, it works. Next I started working on making a home for my little crow, and what better than a dirty human skull? Nothing, because trees are boring and much too high for my tiny body to climb. So here I am, building a skull out of tinfoil, where I got the very clever idea of using my replica human skull as a reference. And seeing the size difference, I realized that at this rate, making a tinfoil skull doesn't take forever. Since tinfoil is very compact, I decided to use something less compact, which is paper. By scrunching up a few paper balls and wrapping them in tinfoil, I managed to make a skull much faster than before, albeit a bit smaller compared to my very thick replica. But I decided that my skull would just be missing the jawbone, because this was already taking long enough. I used my bird to make a small dent in the tinfoil, stabbed the inside with some scissors, and used my hands to make the hole a bit wider. And then added an extra edge of tinfoil, so the bird could fit more comfortably inside. Finally, I stabbed some eyes and a nose into place. I covered it with clay. Next, I rolled out a line of clay, stuck it onto the skull, then blended the top part, which made the skull look like it had one luscious upper lip. I used a toothpick to draw some teeth in, then used my rubber shaper tool to blend the teeth into one another, which made them less flat and like they actually connected to the top of the skull. After that, I just tried to make the skull look more skull-like by adding small bumps and indents where I suppose some parts of the bone structure stick out more. Hey, did you know skulls have texture? Yup, they're covered in lots of bumps and tiny holes. So I used a toothbrush to lightly make some marks onto my extremely unsmooth clay. And I guess our skull is done for now. And yeah, I know it looks kind of wonky, but hey, my first time making a skull, the quality is not terrible. Like something similar to a cheap Halloween decoration you'd find in stores. It's not something I'd buy, but it sells well enough that they put it on display every year. Next, I'm building a tinfoil base for my fox to sit on. I didn't feel like bulking up the base with more tinfoil, so I made more paper balls, stuffed them underneath the tinfoil base, and only needed to cover the whole thing with one layer of tinfoil, which I then proceeded to cover in clay. Here you can clearly see this clay is a rough, bumpy mess, which I swear will be fixed with texture. I did a test fit for the fox on the base and decided to build some bendy trees out of wire. Except it was 3 AM and I didn't have wire, but I did have a pipe cleaner, so I used that instead. I also decided that 4 trees were enough because I was going to build them up with tinfoil anyways. I didn't want them to be too close to one another. I scrunched some tinfoil into long sticks, wrapped them around the pipe cleaners, and covered it in clay. I wanted the trees to look more gnarled and twisty, so I made some long strands of clay, wrapped them around my tree. And roughly blended them together. Finally, I added texture. And blended the bottom of the tree with the bottom of my rounded base. Also, just something to note, if you ever use pipe cleaners, is that wire is sturdy, and these things are not. Sometimes they fall over, and that sucks. Anyways, the wobbly pipe cleaner trees are finished, and now I'm adding more texture. This time to create a grassy base to the sculpture because the only fancy materials I have are clay. But it's done and doesn't look too bad, so that's cool, I guess. Also, wow, these trees are very unstable. Now bake. Now paint. The thing about textured pieces is that there are tiny grooves in which paint is trouble seeping into if it's not wet enough, so sometimes I dip my paintbrush into a bit of water just to make the paint more malleable. After the crow was done, I stuffed its head inside the pumpkin and started working on the fox. After the fox was done, I stuffed its head inside the pumpkin, hot glued the tail onto the back, and now painted little pumpkin hats. Also, trying to dry brush lighter colors onto the darker colors, but you really can't tell. Now onto the skull. I mixed some yellow and white paint to make a sort of creamy bone white color, and then my white paint exploded, but it's fine because I added too much yellow anyway, so it evened out in the end. Since white's such a light color, I had to paint a few layers so the paint wouldn't look so splotchy. Using a replica skull as reference, I then covered up all that paint work I did by layering a thick brown wash over the entire white skull and rubbed out all the excess, letting the paint seep into any textured areas I made. Because I was having a hard time getting my skull to match the color of my fake skull, I decided to look up pictures of real skulls online and see whether my paint job was truly this far off or not. Hey, skulls are actually pretty white, especially if they are being displayed somewhere. That's probably because they have been festerating for any number of years 6 feet underground inside a disgusting petri dish of dirt and tiny bacteria, so I guess the skull is fine. Anyways, onto the fox den, as I'm calling it. Just painting on some darker green and brown colors because, ooh, it's so dark and spooky. And doing more dry brushing that you really can't tell because it's too subtle, I guess. Finally, we can add lights. This also took forever. Also, just a happy little accident, but with the weird way I made the base, I realized I could just cut a hole in the tinfoil at the bottom, pull out all the little paper balls I made, and easily stuff the battery pack inside, which was a lot less messy than stabbing through layers of tinfoil. Anyways, on to the final shots. Well, that's it. I gotta admit, the crow's home ended up looking a bit boring. I mean, it's just a wonky little skull nest that he's eternally trapped inside, so there's not much to offer. Also, if you're wondering why the lighting suddenly got so bright, it's because I filmed these over the course of a few nights, and usually when I finally finish filming, it's not night anymore. Anyways, the fox's home on the other hand looks a bit nicer. Maybe it's just the lights. These were originally Christmas lights I got for sale, but what's cool is that they did different settings, with magical rainbow, flashy seizure warning, and normal. But the mix of pretty colors is definitely my favorite. Also, maybe it's obvious, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I just want to make stupid videos for the sake of making stupid videos. Regardless of the lack of professional production quality, maybe these will magically get better in the future. Again, I don't know, but you can all stick around to find out or not.